Good afternoon and welcome to InfoPointe, Alphapointe's online learning platform. For over 100 years, Alphapointe has been a national leader in the education and rehabilitation of those with vision loss. Today's webinar is working with vocational rehabilitation. And I am your host, Jessie Traster, Manager of Rehabilitation Services. So a little housekeeping as we get started. This webinar is designed with accessibility in mind. That means that we will be describing all slides for those with total vision loss. For those with low vision, this webinar has yellow large print on black background. You may need to turn off your color contrast settings if you have them on. The Zoom text command for that is caps lock C. As the webinar goes, you have the option of chatting with the other participants in a chat box. So at either the top or the bottom of your screen is a control ribbon. This ribbon does hide itself automatically when you are not using your computer, so you may have to wiggle your mouse or touch your screen depending on the type of device you have in order for that control ribbon to reappear. In addition to chat, there is also a question and answer box. It says Q&A, kind of looks like speech bubbles. At the end of the webinar, we will have a question and answer session. So our objectives for today's webinar, we want to define vocational rehabilitation, identify what the eligibility requirements are, and describe the services available to those who qualify. Now, this is where we have to get into a disclaimer. Vocational rehabilitation is a state-run service. Each state has their own Voc Rehab office, which means that some of what we talk about today, we're going to be talking kind of just general overall. Requirements and services are going to vary state by state and by individual case. So on this webinar, we will not be able to answer, does your case specifically qualify for vocational rehabilitation, or answer what specific services can be provided to you. Again, this is all just kind of in general terms about what may be available through your state's vocational rehabilitation services. So vocational rehabilitation came out as funded by the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 as amended. That is where the states get a lot of their vocational rehabilitation funding is through this act. And vocational rehabilitation includes assessment, vocational planning, and services for people with disabilities who need assistance to enter the workforce or to maintain their job. So how do you know if you are eligible for vocational rehabilitation services? Well, first you must have a disability, which is a physical or mental impairment that limits a major life activity. At Alphapointe, our primary population that we serve are those with vision loss. And so most of the population that we serve does qualify for vocational rehabilitation because seeing is considered a major life activity. It has to affect your employment. So not only do you have a disability, but the disability has to also present a barrier to getting employment or maintaining employment. And it has to be determined that you would benefit from the services that vocational rehabilitation offers in order to stay employed or, again, to gain that employment. So not every person who qualifies as having a disability will automatically qualify for rehabilitation services. If you have a student who is on an IEP, being on an IEP does not automatically qualify that student to receive vocational rehabilitation when they get older. And so that eligibility determination will be made by your state's vocational rehabilitation office. So there are lots of different types of services that are offered by the vocational rehabilitation offices. A big one that we do here at Alphapointe is assessments. And so these assessments can determine what training you need to get a job or to keep the job that you have as it relates to your disability. So at Alphapointe, we look at what training and the adaptive skills of blindness that person needs to continue working or to re-enter the workforce after vision loss. Assessments can also determine what is a realistic job goal for you. Very often we have clients who are new to vision loss come to us. They may have recently lost their job due to their vision loss or had to retire from where they were working. And one of the comments that we hear a lot from people is, I used to work in a professional job and now I don't know what I can do. I feel like all I can do is be a dishwasher. And so part of that assessment process is to determine what a realistic vocational goal is for you. What skills do you have, and then what training do you need? So for example, many of our clients are able to return to their previous workplace setting. They just need some training in the adaptive skills of blindness, such as orientation mobility, so they can navigate the workplace, or in adaptive technology, so they can get the computer equipment they need and know how to use it to continue doing the job that they previously had. There's also vocational planning. If you are a student or the parent of a student, you're probably familiar with the IEP process, the Individualized Education Plan. There is something very similar for vocational rehab called the IPE. So it tends to get a little confusing because they are so similar in their abbreviations, but that is your individualized plan of employment. So if you enter vocational rehabilitation, you are determined to be eligible for services. Then you will develop with your counselor an individualized plan of employment. This states what the specific barriers are to your being able to get and maintain a job, and what the plan is to address those barriers, whether it's obtaining equipment, whether it's specific training services, help with finding a job, that type of thing. And so from those assessments and that vocational plan, you may have rehabilitation services, so actual training. Again, here at Alphapointe, we look at the adaptive skills of blindness, everything from Braille to adaptive technology to activities of daily living, which is all of those things that you do around your house to maintain your independence, as well as on the job. It can be anything from labeling strategies, cooking, cleaning, accessing print, and those types of rehabilitation will look different for different disabilities. So somebody with hearing loss will have a different type of rehabilitation than somebody with vision loss, than somebody who has a traumatic brain injury. So we're today going to be talking a lot from the vision loss side of things, but just know that there are similar services for other types of disabilities as well. And it's not uncommon that clients that come to see us may have more than one disability, such as a combined vision and hearing loss, in which case we work with other agencies to help them get all the training that they need. And then at times, vocational rehabilitation can also provide assistive devices. So if on the job you need an adaptive computer, you need your desk raised up so that a wheelchair can fit underneath, you need some type of magnification software or some kind of scanner that reads things back to you. Again, we cannot guarantee anything for another agency. So it is made on, the decisions are made on a case-by-case basis based on those assessments and that vocational planning, that individualized plan of employment, what that person needs to be able to maintain their job. And so if there are assistive devices that are identified as being needed to become employed or maintain current employment, then there is a chance that your vocational rehabilitation agency can assist you in acquiring those devices. When it comes time to actually job searching, they can work with agencies or they can help you with the actual job placement. So for example, for those with vision loss, online applications can be very difficult. It's not uncommon for us to run into places where the scripting is not accurate, and so the screen reader isn't able to fully read the application. And so we have employment specialists on site here at Alphapointe that can help people apply for jobs and kind of get past that potential barrier of an inaccessible job application website. And so a vocational rehab agency can help you look for a job, determine what jobs fit that vocational goal, help you with that entire application process. At times, I have seen vocational rehab agencies help with the acquisition of interview clothes if the person doesn't have, if it's been a long time since you've had to interview, you may not have an interview outfit, for example, or you may need help with transportation to and from a job interview. Again, we cannot make a guarantee for any agency, but these are the types of things that sometimes a vocational rehabilitation agency might be able to help with. And then there's job coaching. So it's not uncommon that You get a job, and now you need a little bit of help on that job to learn the accommodations that you have. For example, we've had clients placed in hotel laundry services where we've had to go and use tactile labeling on their washers and dryers and then teach the person where the settings were that they needed to use. Or it could look like needing to set up adaptive software and teach you how to use the adaptive software in conjunction with the software that your company uses. So if you need that type of job coaching, that additional training in order to keep that job or to get the job initially, they can help provide that job coaching service. Sometimes a person with what they call significant disabilities may need a little bit more than just a little bit of job coaching in the beginning. That person may need an extended period of time of training, or they may need additional training beyond what is typically given, and they may need closer supervision. And so at that point, that becomes supported employment. And so, for example, here at Alphapointe, part of our supported employment is what we call discovery and exploration, where rather than just apply for jobs, we actually go to job sites with that individual, and typically 2 or 3 job sites at a minimum, and let the individual actually try out the job to determine if that job is a good fit for them and if we can make sure that we can accommodate what they need accommodated. And then there's also your pre-employment transition services. Their pre-employment transition services are for kids who are leaving school. They're that transition age, they're getting ready to enter the workforce. We're going to talk a little bit more in depth about pre-employment transition services a little bit later, but every state has their own age. Federally, it goes up to the age of 21, but states can raise that. So again, the eligibility for that pre-employment transition service is going to vary from state to state. If you are the parent of a student who has a disability, or you are a student with a disability who is still in high school, at age 16 at the latest, by law, your high school is supposed to start, if you have an IEP, transition planning, which includes identifying outside resources. And so that is a good time to contact a your local vocational rehabilitation agency to find out if you qualify, and they might be able to help you obtain services while you're still in school or right after school ends to help with that transition from high school to your job. So there has been a lot of changes to vocational rehabilitation through the Workforce Innovations and Opportunities Act. So the goal of vocational rehabilitation has always been to place people with disabilities in competitive employment. And so previously, competitive employment was employment that was fairly comparable in terms of skill level, requirements, et cetera, to what was found in the overall community. So here at Alphapointe, we are part of National Industries for the Blind. There is a sector of our business where over 75% of those working in those jobs do have to have a diagnosis of legal blindness. Prior to the passing of the Workforce Innovations and Opportunities Act, those coming through vocational rehabilitation, because the goal of coming through vocational rehab is to get a job or to maintain a current job, there were jobs in that sector that were considered competitive because they required a high skill level. They required degrees, they required the ability to operate machines that were fairly complex. And so based on skill level, those were considered appropriate job goals for somebody coming through a state vocational rehabilitation program. That has changed a little bit with the passing of the Workforce Innovations and Opportunities Act. So they added in there kind of this idea of the integrated employment. So now it's not just competitive, but competitive integrated employment. And this applies to those who are seeking services through a state vocational rehabilitation agency. And basically what that means is that in your work setting, the percentage of people with disabilities has to be comparable to that of the general population. So using again Alphapointe as an example, jobs that are part of our national industries for the blind, where at least 75% of people in those jobs have to be legally blind, would no longer qualify as a competitive integrated job under the Workforce Innovations and Opportunities Act, because such a high percentage of that workforce does have a disability. But jobs on the administration side, where we have a lower percentage of those with disabilities, might still qualify. Every state does interpret this a little bit differently. So if you're not sure if your chosen job goal qualifies as competitive integrated employment under that vocational rehabilitation, I encourage you to speak with your counselor as to what kind of job goals they can support. Here at Alphapointe, our employment services, we are always working to place people within the community where they live when it comes to jobs. Another thing that the Workforce Innovations and Opportunities Act did was really define that pre-employment transition services. So again, this is when students are getting ready to graduate high school. So typically transition services start about age 16, but every state sets its own minimum limit. And then it typically goes to about age 21, similar to special education law, but states can set higher limits. So again, it's all going to depend on your state. But the idea is that the states have to spend 15% of their budget on these pre-employment transition services. So helping youth with disabilities be able to enter the workforce. And so this can look like a lot of different things. For example, this can be work experience. Here at Alphapointe, for our youth with visual impairments within the Kansas City area, we have what we call our STEP program, our Student Transitional Employment Program, which we think of as like your first summer job. We know that a lot of our students with visual impairments have a more difficult time finding that first summer job, because businesses may not be sure how a person with vision loss can do that job. We know they can do that. And so we are working with those businesses in the community to help hire that student, and we're providing that student the job coaching that they need to be able to succeed in that job. And that's through vocational rehabilitation, through that pre-employment transition services. Pre-employment transition services can also look like training or rehabilitation services that are needed to take that next step. So again, using vision loss as the example at Alphapointe, we sometimes will work with a school system and with a vocational rehab agency to do a very thorough assessment in all of the areas of the adaptive skills of blindness between their junior and senior year. That way it can inform the IEP during that last year. And here's what maybe we need to work on to be ready for college or ready to enter the workforce, depending on what that student's goal is. And so that can look like anything from adaptive technology to activities of daily living, so being able to independently maintain your home, to going, again, we might recommend something like the Student Transition Employment Program so that students can gain some work experience similar to what their non-disabled peers are experiencing. Sometimes through pre-employment transition services, if it's related to a job goal, a rehabilitation agency may also be able to help with education. So if your job goal requires you to go to college, that might be another source for assistance. We work at Alphapointe with vocational rehab through our college prep program, where we help students navigate that office of accessibility, because it does look very different for our students going from high school to college in terms of how you go about getting the accommodations you need, who's responsible for those accommodations, that type of thing. And so working through a vocational rehab agency or a college preparation program like the one at Alphapointe can help students be more successful as they transition from high school to college, to make sure that they have everything that they need, from adaptive equipment to the right accommodations, to make sure that student is successful. So if you think that you may be eligible for services, how do you go about getting them? Well, the first thing that you might want to do is call your local office. So again, every state has their own vocational rehabilitation agency. Every state services are going to look slightly different. For example, here in Missouri, if you have vision loss, we have a specific agency that is under that vocational rehabilitation umbrella, but is separate from vocational rehab. It's called Rehab Services for the Blind. Other states that we work with, their blindness services are part of the overall vocational rehabilitation. So every state has a little bit different in how they have things organized. But if you Google your state's name and vocational rehabilitation, you should be able to find a number that you can call to call your local office and tell them that you want to open a case. And they may ask you to submit a written application. This can often be found, again, on the state's website. So once you submit that application, you will be assigned a vocational counselor, and that person will work with you on determining if you are eligible. So again, just because you have an IEP in school does not mean that you are eligible for vocational rehabilitation services. Also, if you look at some of the state websites, you'll see disclaimers along the lines of the states do not have the resources to help every single person with a disability who applies for services. And so they may have preferential criteria for selection. And so they will work with you to determine if you meet that state's specific criteria for selection. As you go through that eligibility determination, then they will start going into that vocational planning, determining exactly what you need in order to get a job or maintain a job. So some notes about obtaining services. You do not have to be out of work to obtain services. We work with a lot of clients who are currently employed. They have lost some or all of their vision, and their workplace has agreed to allow them to continue in that position or to help them get what they need to continue in that position or a slightly different position, but they need some equipment, some training, some services to maintain the job they are currently in. So it is possible to get vocational rehabilitation services for a disability if you are currently employed. If you are not employed, they are also able to help you determine what job would be available for you. And so you are able to get services either as a pre-employment transition student, so before your student is even old enough to start looking for a job, but they're getting ready to enter that transition phase. If you're somebody who has recently lost work because you have acquired a disability, or if you're somebody who has a disability recently acquired that you are trying to maintain a current job. The one thing is that by going through vocational rehabilitation, you are agreeing to seek work within the community. So you're agreeing to seeking employment or maintaining your current employment, and you're agreeing to doing that in a competitive and integrated setting. And again, if you have questions about whether you are eligible, the best thing to do is to call your state office. And so this is where Alphapointe can help. If you have recently experienced vision loss, we do have a low vision clinic. We do work with the state offices in Kansas and Missouri and Arkansas, and can help and we can give you the forms you need to determine if your vision meets their criteria for eligibility, as well as helping to determine what devices you need, what assistance you need, accommodations that can be used in the development of that individualized plan of employment. Our comprehensive rehabilitation services works very closely with rehabilitation agencies. We have services in both Kansas City and New York City. And our Kansas City services are residential, which means we do take people from outside the Kansas City metro. So if you think that you would benefit from Alphapointe services and you have a case open with vocational rehabilitation, if you think Alphapointe is the best fit for you, you can ask your counselor about a referral to our program. And then we also have employment services in both the Kansas City metro area and in New York City, again, helping people find jobs after they have gone through rehabilitation. So at this time, we will take questions, but again, I do want to emphasize all of this is on a state-by-state basis, so I can't answer any specific questions to specific cases or specific states because every state has their own criteria. And while we wait to see if questions come in, we do want to say thank you to everybody who participated in our webinar today. This is the last in our employment series, and you can find some of our previous webinars on our Alphapointe YouTube channel. And then next week is going to start our back to school series. So if you are the parent of a child with vision loss or a child with vision loss still in school, or you know somebody who has vision loss that's still in school, we will have a series of webinars designed to help parents get the information they need for sending their students back to school, or students to get the information they need with everything from extracurricular activities to what to expect from IEP services during the era of COVID-19 and what schools legally are going to be required to do as we start back in this very unusual time. So while we wait for questions, again, we do want to say thank you. These webinars are offered free of charge. So if you would like to help us out to continue to offer all of these services, you can go to www.alphapointe.org, and there is an E on the end of Alphapointe. There you can make a donation, or you can call us at 816-421-5848. And if you or someone you know has vision loss and you think that you would benefit from our services, again, you can go to alphapointe.org or call us on our main number at 816-421-5848. And we did have a thank you from Claudia. So thank you, Claudia, for your kind words. We did want to let you know that we saw that. Are there any other questions? This webinar is a little bit shorter today. We didn't have quite as much content to dive into as we did with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So we'll give it another minute or two for questions. And all right. Well, I hope that everybody has a great weekend. If you're in the Kansas City area, I hope everybody's enjoying all the rain that we're getting in the cooler temperatures. And we'll see everybody next week for the start of our Back to School series with our special guest panelist, Anthony Blades of the Regional Professional Development Center. Thank you.